Nobody's a bigger Hawks fan than Congressman Mike Quigley. He still plays grown-up hockey, much like others like me who have gotten soft and go, oh, the skates hurt my ankles.
I like you call it grown-up hockey. Adult hockey.
Better than old man hockey.
Yes.
I'd never say that.
No.
What do you call it, Congressman Quigley? What do you call your hockey?
Yeah, I suppose old and in the way.
Not as quick as I used to be hockey?
No, he's a strong skater, and don't let him get you in a corner. He'll pound on you. Yeah. And by the way, we weren't even playing hockey. We had lunch once, and he put me in a corner and just started pounding on me. I said it's a flashback from when he played hockey.
Switching the boards.
All right, so lots to talk about in relation to Congress. Andrea, why don't you start with the news?
Well, the former Speaker Kevin McCarthy will leave Congress at the end of the year. Was that a surprise to you? And what do you think? Good, bad, indifferent?
Well, look, I can't blame him. He tried very much to appease the far right, which sort of hijacked the party. I think in the end, the lesson that McCarthy can teach is you will never appease the extremist in our system. The best you can do is work to compromise with everyone else and move forward, because it's a divided government. You're never going to get anything done without compromise. And if you move to the extreme position on either side, you're never going to get anything done.
Nope.
It's like a rom-com.
A bad rom-com.
Yeah, it is. They're never going to love you. Drop these folks and move on and work with somebody else. He respectfully made a deal, and it worked with the Senate and the Democrats to deal with the debt ceiling and these numbers. He did that in June. And then they said, well, we're going to go after you. Had he come to the Democrats and said, we're going to finish operating this government, we would have found a way to keep him there. So I think the lesson is you got to move forward. You got to move in the middle. You got to get something done. But frankly, I don't blame him. It's not a pleasant place to be. And once you're the speaker, there's not a lot more fun to have.
Right. Well, you've obviously worked across the aisle with both parties for many, many years. What do you think of the new speaker, Mike Johnson, and will he be able to do that?
He hasn't shown any interest in doing it, has he?
It's clear. At this point, he hasn't shown any interest to do that. And, when I talk to the centrist Republicans that we work with, they seem to say that he hasn't figured that out yet. And we're going to find out in the next week or two if he will, because that's the only way we're going to fund our supplementals to address Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, whatever policies they want to address. And then in January and February, funding the government. We still haven't passed the easiest bill that Congress always passed, which is defense authorization.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That hasn't happened. We haven't passed something called 702, which is a reauthorization critical to the intelligence community, to our national defense. So we're not getting the basics done, and I just wish we could fast forward to the point where he recognizes that and moves forward in the middle.
Well, the thing about McCarthy leaving is it's a very thin margin now. You're down to 3 votes that the Republicans have to have on anything that's close. But I don't see anything legitimately being brought to the floor that wouldn't have any problem surviving that 3-vote margin. And you're talking about really crucial things, not just defense spending, but, I'm not going to sit here and argue anymore about whether or not we ought to be helping Ukraine and helping Israel and try to save lives of civilians in Gaza. I mean, all that stuff matters, but the whole Ukraine thing's going to run out, and I'm hearing hours of argument about transgender funding.
Well, let me give you a flash from the coming weeks. There are more Republicans who are going to not just say, I'm not going to run again. I predict, having spoken to folks, that you'll see several more Republicans just quit.
Really?
And leave. Right? I mean, look, here's why it happens now. The filing deadlines for primaries in the elections of a lot of states are about to pop up. And now's the time to say, I'm going to pass the torch. So, sure, and to your point on Ukraine, we are running out of time and money. the delay in itself in the funding and the threat that it will not continue has already started to impact the conflict. Ukraine is starting to ration its munitions, and don't think Putin doesn't recognize that. And elsewhere, that Beijing, Tehran, they're testing our resolve. And if we don't get this done, we will fail. So, hey, well, what does Quigley know? He's not a military guy. General Milley, far from a leftist, said, if we don't do this, we'll be doubling down our defense budgets at some point soon, because it will introduce not an era of great power competition. It'll begin an era of great power conflict, because Putin's plans aren't just, let me run through what Putin was really going to do. If he took Ukraine, and he still could, he reforms the federation with puppet governments in Ukraine and Belarus. And then he moves on Moldova, where he already has disputed territories, and then Georgia. And then he creates a land bridge to an area next to Poland on the water, Kaliningrad. And then he sets his sights on the Baltics. Now we're talking NATO countries. We're talking Article 5. It is so much in our interest to let the Ukrainians do this bloody fighting, but to help them do it, because in the end, our national security interest is at stake.
If we break it down just to money in the short amount of time we have here, the weapons that are built in largely red states and red districts by weapons makers. So voting against funding Ukraine is voting against building weapons that go to Ukraine, but it's also costing jobs in the districts of these people that are fighting against it. I don't get it.
Much of this money that would be in this package is to replenish our arms. So we have given, frankly, some older technology, still worthwhile to the Ukrainians, and we're replenishing with newer technology, more able to adjust to the modern conflicts that we guard against that would take place, in other parts of the world. So it's in our interest, to your point, to do this, to be aware of the significance. I think it's also important to recognize it was made clear to us that if we go south on Ukraine, many of our allies will too, that uniting of NATO, which was so helpful to our own national security in the West and our economic interest and so forth, that could falter. So there's a lot at stake here. A lot of people who are smarter than I am on military issues, historical issues, they're the ones saying history is looking back at this point. You just played FDR talking about a critical moment in history. I'm about to go over and vote steps from where he said those words, and this is our moment. He talked about an arsenal of democracy, but I think more important were some of his last words, putting all this in perspective just before he passed in his last inaugural. He reminded us, and remember everything he had gone through with the appeasers and the apologists. He said, we've come to learn that our safety is dependent on the well-being of nations far away from ours.
That's it.
I know folks want to avoid that dirty little fact, but the way the world is now with technology and capabilities, it's more true now. So, the liberal Democrat from Chicago is hawkish on that point, but I just think it makes sense. It wasn't just Republicans in the old days spouting the Reagan doctrine, which they now vote against, unfortunately, that we will do everything we can for our allies to fight against Russian aggression. What did Kennedy say? We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and success of liberty. We're there now, folks.
Yeah, and the tipping point is now, and Putin and Xi and the various dictators or people in the world They don't sit and cower in the corner because the United States is bigger and badder than they are. They look for ways to take advantage of weaknesses. And we put our weaknesses on display every day.
You mentioned them. I would add Tehran, because Tehran is tied to both conflicts.
Yep.
Tehran trained and gave military assistance to Hamas.
Yep.
And they're currently giving killer drones to the Russians. And after October 7th, Putin hosted Hamas and Putin hosted Tehran. So the world is complicated, but it is all tied together, and you have to make your moment.
Nice to talk to you. And we'll speak on or off or both the air and off the air and whatever I'm attempting to say before Christmas. But at any rate, thank you, and go get that vote done.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. From the 5th in Illinois, Congressman Mike Quigley, who actually doesn't dislike Republicans. He likes Republicans, and he likes working with them. What a crazy idea.
Right.